Israeli officials say up to 150 of its citizens were taken hostage by Hamas. These images are of an Israel Defense Force soldier whose father says he went missing during Saturday's attack. His name, Itay Chen. He's 19 years old. He is a U.S. and Israeli citizen and was serving his first year in the IDF. His father, Ruby Chen, joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us, sir, under what are, for us, unimaginable circumstances. So we appreciate your time. But can you tell us what you know about what happened to your son?
Yeah, so first, thanks for having us, and thanks for letting us, amplify our message. And if I may just begin by saying that we felt, President Biden yesterday speak, from here. And, message was well taken. The fact that also he put as his first priority finding the people that are missing, U.S. citizens, as well as the hostages, and putting that as the administration's first priority. So we see that as a very positive development. You might know that Secretary of State is on the way here. We asked to meet him, and we expect that to happen.
Can you tell us about your son?
Sure. So Itay is like any other kid that you would see. Grew up like loving NBA basketball. I grew up in New York City, so that makes me a Knicks fan. He, of course, became to adore Kobe Bryant and became a Lakers fan. But, you can't always get what you want with the kids, is it? Not always the case. He was able to enlist to the Army, which is mandatory here. And he had his boot camp service, did some basic training. And he was at his military base, which was on the border of Gaza. And the last communication we had with him was Saturday morning, where he sent us a message saying that they are under missile attack. We know that he was able to mobilize himself, be active in the field. But ever since, we do not know what is his origins. And we have been received a notification from the IDF stating that his status is missing in action. What does that mean? That means that since Saturday, nobody has been physically able to identify him in the field. No one has seen him in a hospital. No one has also declared that he has been deceased. So basically, he's not been found. And after 60 hours of fighting, 70 hours of fighting, it might be a good assumption to say that he might not be in the state of Israel.
What has it been like for you then over the past 3-4 days?
I think President Biden, coined it well, a black hole in the soul. That's basically, there's so many emotions going on. But now it's not the time to lose focus. Currently, the focus is, and this is where we have requested from the U.S. to be active in this negotiation process and not take a back seat. The U.S. has at its disposal many capabilities, influence in the region that Israel does not have. And we have about 20 missing or hostage U.S. citizens. What we request from the U.S. is to be active and provide the support that it should to all of its citizens, wherever they might not be. Going back to Secretary of State Blinken, we expect to meet him. We hope to meet him. Hopefully he sees meeting us as something important in his visit, that he would be able to explain to us what the U.S. has been doing, what it is doing, and what it intends to do in order to help us.
So has anyone from the State Department been in contact with you yet?
Yeah, so it's been a bit sketchy the first couple of days. Like, they were gathering information, figuring out who, what, why. We've been having more stable communication with the State Department, each family. But again, having someone senior talk to us and explain exactly what is the plan going forward and what they know has not happened, to the best of my understanding.
Mr. Chen, you and the other family members of the more than 150 people missing since Saturday's brutal, cold-blooded attack are in a unique position. Your family members are perhaps conceivably in Gaza. We know that the Hamas leadership has threatened to execute hostages if Israel does not give warning for its aerial bombings. What is your position? And I know it's not representative of everybody, but what's your feeling about that specific request from Hamas? And how do you feel about those aerial bombings that perhaps might occur, knowing that perhaps your son is in harm's way?
So that's a little bit about my paycheck. I'm a simple guy, I'm not a professional. I'm not an expert. There are those that, know how to make those decisions. I believe that, they will make the correct decisions, whatever it might not be. But at the end of the day, we're dealing here with an organization that, President Biden called it, sheer evil. You asked a few minutes ago about finding logic to some of the actions happening here in the region. The only logic that exists is that there is no logic. That's the logic. So you're trying to rationalize behavior of an organization that is like ISIS, and they don't think the way that Western society thinks. And unfortunately, this organization does not abide to international law, which I think should be one of the main points that the U.S. should demand, that any hostage that is in the Hamas possession should be able to see a doctor, should be identified, and should have a representative of the Red Cross, the UN, visit them. I think that's the most basic thing that anyone would ask.
And yet, as you say, Mr. Chen, Hamas is not, they don't adhere to those Geneva Conventions or those norms that other countries have agreed to, which is absolutely horrible. Finally, Emery asked about how you're doing, and I also wonder. We keep seeing pictures of Itay and presumably his family members and his friends. I know you're able to appear on camera and have a conversation with us, but how are his other family members, your other family members, doing, especially the younger ones?
Yeah, so I'm a New Yorker. I grew up, in Flatbush, public education system. I hope to think, I got the New York DNA. We know how to tough it up when we need to. Hopefully, my son got a part of that as well. Whatever situation he's in, he's able to cope with it. We are a family that are together and we support one another. I won't envision or ask any of my largest enemies to go through the process that we're going through the last couple of days. My wife, Itay's mom, I don't think I need to add and say what type of ordeal she has been going through the last couple of days.
I can only imagine. Ruby Chen, thanks for sharing with us. Really appreciate it. Stay safe.
Thank you, sir.